In this video, I'm working on a couple of different Christmas cards, and my camera didn't turn on right away when I thought it did, so I missed one part, but not to worry because I have to actually redo that card anyway. So what you see me here doing is I transferred a word onto my card. The word is joy, and I lightly traced it onto my card with carbon paper, and then I went over that with masking fluid. And now I'm moving on to my other card and just transferring these letters onto it, and I'm going over these with ink, so I didn't need to be as light with them. And I took a toothbrush and just kind of spritzed my card with masking fluid, which I know you can't see at this point, but you'll see why soon. And then I'm going over the letters with my waterproof ink. Now back to this first card, which I like parts about it. I think it's going to be worth redoing. I just made a couple of mistakes with it. So I had gone over that with masking fluid, and you can kind of see where it says Merry Christmas. I went over that with masking fluid, and I'm kind of just painting a really fun loose tree. And you can see I used masking fluid to mask out some spots where I want to put some Christmas ornaments. My camera's going crazy right now, sorry about that. But I'm going to basically make this word joy on a Christmas ornament. And I'm just making it very simple and kind of just doing red, putting a little bit of yellow where some of the highlights are going to be. And I guess my camera decided to stop freaking out here. Oh, there we go again. So this one is going to be kind of a snowy forest scene, so I'm going over everything in the sky with just a light blue wash, and then I'm, while it's still wet, adding some green so I can get some really soft, distant trees, and I'm making it a little bit darker at the bottom. So now I'm removing all the masking fluid from my first card, so you can see that the masking fluid helped me just to have a really nice, clean, white area in here, and I'm gonna leave the words white, and I decided to do different colors on the ornaments, or maybe they're, you know, lights or something like that. And I think that I would have liked this card better if I had pretty much left it at that point, but you'll see I'm gonna do a little bit more, and it kind of ruined it, which is why I need to redo it. And then I'm just adding some more dark layers to this so that the word really stands out. And now I'm going in, this background's pretty much dry, so I'm adding some trees that are a little bit more defined. And I want some of that background just to kind of show through. And I'm not being really careful about how I paint these trees, just trying to basically make them pointier and narrower at the top, and then they get wider at the bottom, as evergreens tend to do. And then I don't want to cover all that snow with blue, I just added a little bit of light blue. So I decided here to connect all the lights, which that in itself I don't like, but then I also went and like circled around the ornaments, and I really didn't like that, so I'm gonna redo that card and it's gonna look way better. Now I'm just painting this little cabin house, leaving the roof white as if it has snow on it, and erasing some of the pencil marks on the words. Or I guess it's carbon. And now I'm just using my finger to brush off all that masking fluid. And then you can kind of see that it looks like it's snowing in that picture. Now I'm just taking the masking fluid off of the ornament piece and drawing a circle around it, and then putting the little top. Okay, so now I'm going to redo that Christmas tree card, and I'm also going to do another card that I thought about just because I like to work on at least two things at once while I'm waiting for parts of each painting to dry. So I'm going back and transferring that Merry Christmas very lightly onto my card, and I'm also going to use an eraser just to make it even lighter. Since I'm going over that with masking fluid and I want it to be white, I really only need those marks to be just dark enough for me to see them so that I can cover them with the masking fluid. and I just needed to adjust my camera there really quick. So I'm just using my silicone applicator tool, and this is my really pointy one that I'm using for this since I want these letters to be pretty narrow. And I'm not worried about, you know, applying my masking fluid in a way that it looks like these letters were printed off of a computer. I'm kind of letting them be a little bit imperfect. And then on this card, I'm going to use more masking fluid to make smaller ornaments or lights all over this tree. And basically, I didn't draw out the tree or anything like that. I'm just applying these dots in, you know, basically a tree shape or a triangle shape. And I'm gonna let that dry. And those dots, they do kind of take a little while to dry, just because I applied that fluid pretty thick. So here's the next card I'm going to do, and I'm using one of my other silicone tools that isn't very pointy because I want these letters to be pretty wide, and I just applied masking fluid, and it says Noel. And what I'm going to do on this card is just kind of paint a big poinsettia behind the Noel. So I'm slowing this down a little bit so that you can see a little bit better how I'm painting the petals of the poinsettia flower. And usually what I do when I'm painting a flower is I'll look at a photo reference just to kind of get a sense of the general shape of the petals. But I'm not painting this like any particular poinsettia, I'm just letting it be very loose. So with poinsettias, basically, you know, these petals, they come to a point at the end, and there is a layer of smaller petals closer to the center of the flower. And then as I work on this, the petals will just get larger. And there's basically just 2 or 3 layers of petals on a poinsettia. So I used a very light red initially, and then while it was still wet, I applied some more concentrated watercolor just to add a little bit of variety to the petals so that they're not just flat. And then I'm using this light kind of watery watercolor to start putting in the larger petals. And I'm leaving just a little bit of white between the small petals and the larger petals. And right now I'm just using my paper towel to add a little bit of texture to those small petals because it seemed like I was going to get some hard edges with the watercolor that I didn't really want. And I'm going to go ahead and paint all of these large petals. And by the time I get back to adding in more color to the large petals, I'm pretty sure they're going to be dry. So I'll show you how to deal with that. And then toward the bottom of the card, I don't have to be as careful with the shape of the petals because the center of the flower is on the card in a way that those petals at the bottom are actually just going to be running off. So really what I want to do is just make sure I have enough color around the Noel word to make sure that there's going to be a lot of contrast. So when I remove the masking fluid, the Noel will be white, of course. And I just want to have lots of color around that so that the white really stands out and you can read the word. Okay, so now I've got all the large petals in place, and those are all the petals that I'm going to add for this flower. I will put some leaves in the background, so it's not just going to be a lot of white. So what I'm doing right now, I want to add more color into those large flowers. So what I did is I just dipped my brush into a little bit of water, and I went over that petal with just some clear water, and that kind of re-wets the surface, and then I can start adding in more of those bright colors, and they will kind of softly bleed and merge together. So if you have an area that dries but you still want some really soft colors and some bleeding to happen, all you have to do is just re-wet that surface with a little bit of water. Not too much water, but just a little bit, just to make it damp again. And what I'm trying to do with my color is I'm trying to keep the really bright, bold colors toward the center of the flower, so at the bottom of the petals. And then I want the color to get a little bit lighter toward the edge of the petals, the outward edge. So you can see I'm allowing the edges just to kind of remain the way that I initially painted them, so they're going to stay really light. And again, I want to make sure I have a lot of contrast around those letters, so I'm really going to be focusing on making sure that the colors around the letters are really saturated, and I'll even add a little bit of shadow in there in a little bit. But I'm just kind of working my way around the flower very loosely. And you can really see, as I make the colors more bright and bold, you can see the separation between the petals a little bit, where I've left some white. And you could use masking fluid to do that if you don't feel comfortable just kind of winging it. And you can also leave more white space between your petals than I am, and then you can actually go back in and kind of fill it in together when you kind of have the basic shape all laid out, if you feel more comfortable with that. I didn't really want to overdo it with the masking fluid since I had already used it on the letters. I think if you overuse masking fluid, it can get just a little bit overwhelming, so I try to keep that pretty minimal. So now I'm just going back in and adding colors kind of just as brightly and boldly as I can. So I'm trying to get as much pigment out of my wells as I can. And you can see that I do kind of have two different kinds of red that I'm using here. One's more of kind of an orangish red, and the other's kind of a, I think maybe a little bit more of a magenta red. And I'm kind of using those indiscriminately, but I'm kind of using them together just to get a little bit of color variation. But you could definitely get by with just using one red and keeping it light in some areas and dark in others. So now I'm going to go ahead and start putting in some leaves in the background, and I'm going to do this much the same way. You really, for this project, don't need to worry about the shape of the leaves too much. I'm basically just going in and filling in all the white background space with green. And I'm first using kind of a yellowish green, but I'm going to add some variation to the leaves as well with some green that I have more blue in. And yep, now I'm just adding in a little bit of blue. So I'm putting this into the leaves while they're still relatively dry so that the colors can kind of merge together. And then I'm kind of deciding to fill in even the rest of the white space with this darker bluish green so that it looks like there's, you know, maybe some layers of leaves behind these yellowish green leaves. And kind of making it a little bit darker toward the center of the leaves, and then letting it get lighter as it gets to the outer edge. But just keep these really loose and fun, and just let the colors merge together whatever way they are going to, because that's not our focal point anyway. So now I'm going to add in some shadows onto the red petals, and I'm kind of just mixing up a reddish violet. So I have quite a bit of red on there, but then I'm just adding in a little bit of blue. I want to keep this a little bit more red, but I feel like I've used my colors as boldly as I can, and I just need a little bit more definition. So I'm going in very, very lightly toward the center and putting in a little bit of this kind of reddish purple just to further define those petals and also to add a little bit more contrast around the word. And then I will need to let this dry fully before I can remove the masking fluid. And I might do one other thing with this. So right now I'm just going in with some yellow and just kind of brightening up some of those edges. So now I'm just checking to make sure all my masking fluid is totally dry before I do anything. And I mixed up a little bit more yellowish green. And I'm just very loosely going in and brushing a general tree shape. And then as I work, I'll just kind of add a little bit more blue to the mix to make it a little bit darker and a little bit looking more like your stereotypical Christmas tree. And I definitely want the bottom of the tree to be nice and bold and kind of dark so that my Merry Christmas stands out really well. And I don't want this all just to be one shade of green, so I also want some variety in there. And then going back in with just a little bit of yellow to brighten it up around the edges. And then I'm going to kind of keep it a little bit darker toward the center. So around the center line of the tree, I'm putting in more of the bluish green and letting all that merge together. Alright, so now back to my poinsettia card, and I'm deciding here I'm going to keep the masking fluid on, and I'm going to apply a really light glaze of yellow over everything just to kind of brighten it up. And then when I remove the masking fluid, my Noel is really going to stand out because that's going to be the only part of the card that's just totally white. Alright, so before you remove masking fluid, always make sure that your paint is really dry. If it's even just a little bit damp, then when you rub the masking fluid off, the paper is going to be soft because it's damp, and you're going to end up ripping into your paper. So make sure it's really dry, and then with your finger very gently rub it off. And to make sure you don't miss any spots, just kind of rub your hand around and make sure you don't feel any bumps from masking fluid. And you can see that my Merry Christmas is really standing out this time because I used darker, bolder colors at the bottom of the tree than I did initially with the first card. And now I'm just going to add a little bit of color, and I'm going to make the ornaments smaller this time than I did the first time. And I'm leaving a little bit of white around the outside of the ornaments. I just think that that looks kind of nice. And this time I'm just not going to use any black ink on this card because I don't think that that really added to it, and I think keeping it simple is going to be the way to go. So with these ornaments or lights, I'm just basically going to stick to red and yellow and a little bit of blue. Just keep it very simple. I'm not going to add any color to the Merry Christmas. I'm going to just leave that as it is. And now I'm making sure that my poinsettia painting is totally dry, and taking the masking fluid off of letters like this is really kind of fun and easy because you can sort of just pull it off. It's sort of like rubber cement. So that looks pretty nice, I think. And there's my joy card and my Merry Christmas little forest cabin card. And then comparing these, you can definitely see which one I liked best. And then just to wrap this up, I decided to use a white gel pen just to add a little dot of white to the center of each of the ornaments. I think that just makes it look kind of nice. And it still is keeping it very simple, and I'm still not using any black ink. And yeah, I think that these all turned out pretty well.